Eastern France, autumn 1942, and with the afternoon daylight fading, a large formation of Avro Lancaster Heavy Bombers are speeding their way over the French countryside at low level. Their target? The Schneider Works, the vitally important iron and steel mill at Creusot, which is responsible for the manufacture of tanks and heavy weapons for the occupying German forces. Destroying this target will be a huge blow to the German war machine. By the summer of 1942, RAF Bomber Command had a problem. Since the previous autumn, it had been coming under increased scrutiny and, from many quarters, increased criticism in the efficiency of its operational results. On the 22nd of February 1942, a new commander was put in place, Acting Air Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, and he was tasked with changing the fortunes of Bomber Command and to quieten down the criticism. In order to put on display the true capabilities, skill and power of Bomber Command, he planned some audacious raids such as the 1000 Bomber Raids, the first of which took place over Cologne on the night of the 30th and 31st of May 1942. These raids may have been spectacular in themselves, but they continued to draw criticism as losses were continuing to mount and efficiency was not necessarily improving. Despite the advances in technology, new heavy bombers such as the improved Handley Page Halifax B2 and the new Avro Lancaster, both employing new navigation aids and bomb aiming equipment, the morale of the aircrews was suffering. Bomber Command and Arthur Harris needed a quick success. In the east of central France sits the provincial town of Creusot, and situated there is the Schneider Creusot iron and steel mill. Founded in 1836 by Eugene Schneider and his brother Adolphus Schneider, whose grandson Jacques would later go on to create the aviation competition the Schneider Trophy, the mill had become renowned for its production of steel, railways and locomotives, and particularly armaments, including tanks and heavy guns. In German-occupied France, it was crucial to the supply of military hardware to the German war machine, and therefore there were few, if any, targets of a higher priority to the Allies. To Arthur Harris, the destruction of this target would provide not only a hammer blow to the enemy, but a massive lift in the morale and reputation at home of Bomber Command. The mission, however, had its significant challenges. The first was that to arrive at the target, the bomber force would have to fly 300 miles over occupied territory and run the possible gauntlet of German fighters and anti-aircraft defences. The second was that in the immediate area around the steel mill was a large concentration of houses for the French civilian workforce, bringing with it the very real possibility of civilian casualties. To minimise the risks to civilians and to ensure as high an accuracy as possible, the raid would have to take place in daylight, something the RAF was not keen to do. Since the early days of the war, many daylight bombing missions had resulted in terrible losses to aircraft and aircrews. And as such, since 1940, the RAF had been conducting bomber missions mainly at night. There had been a few exceptions, such as the raid on Augsburg on the 17th of April 1942. 12 of the newly introduced Avro Lancaster bombers were sent on a long-range, low-level daylight bombing run to destroy the MAN U-boat engine plant. Operation Margin had minimal success, and out of the 12 aircraft that took part, only 5 returned. This new mission had high hopes for a more successful outcome. Harris once again turned to the Avro Lancaster to carry out this raid. Its excellent range, large bomb load and speed was hoped to give the crews the advantages that they needed. Plus, by late 1942, the number of aircraft supplied to the RAF was becoming significant. To avoid the higher concentrations of German fighters stationed in northern France, Germany and Belgium, and considering that any fighter escort could only accompany the bomber force for the first 200 miles or so, a direct path to the target was ruled out. Instead, the available range of the Lancaster would be put to use by flying out southwest over the Bay of Biscay, before turning west and crossing the French coast just to the south of Nantes, before continuing over the French countryside at low level towards the target. The attack would be carried out as daylight was fading, to enable the Lancasters to make their escape back to Britain using a more direct route but under a cover of darkness, and again flying at low level and in close formation. Now, on the face of it, this all sounded very straightforward, except most Bomber Command crews had been trained to fly at high altitude and more spaced out. This would require a completely different set of piloting skills. At this stage of the war, the Avro Lancaster was still relatively new in service, and the only group that had completed the type conversion was No. 5 Group, belonging to Air Vice Marshal Alec Corriton. Therefore, Harris called upon all 9 squadrons of No. 5 Group to carry out this mission, and they immediately started low-level flying training. By the middle of October, and with the crews beginning to get to grips with the new type of flying, tensions were running high throughout all the squadrons. Following each of the training exercises, all aircraft were kept fuelled and armed and at a heightened state of readiness, in case the weather gave the all clear. But as yet, the crew still did not know what the target was, the only exception being the group leader, Wing Commander Leonard Slee of 49 Squadron. On the morning of the 17th of October, the weather gave them a break. Operation Robinson was good to go. At several bases in eastern England, the aircrews of the 9 squadrons of No. 5 Group were now finally being given the full details of the mission. 94 Lancasters, armed with 10 500-pound bombs each, would set off for eastern France. 88 Lancasters would attack the main target of the iron mill, and the remaining 6 would attack a nearby electrical transformer station at Montchanin that supplied the mill with power. At 8 minutes past 12, Wing Commander Slee in his 49 Squadron Lancaster was the first to take off, and as he was climbing out, one by one, a further 93 heavy bombers were taken to the air. At RAF Syerston, 106 Squadron was getting airborne, led by Wing Commander Guy Gibson, who would, 7 months later, lead the 617 Squadron raid against the German dams in Operation Chastise. In the skies over eastern England, they formed a loose formation and headed south towards the English Channel. A significant risk to the formation would be once it was out over the English Channel. There was a chance they would be spotted by U-boats or by spotters in French coastal areas. To address this, flying some 15 minutes ahead of the Lancaster formation was a squadron of Armstrong-Whitworth Whitley bombers to attack any U-boats and keep them below the surface, whilst at the same time, fighters of RAF Fighter Command along with de Havilland Mosquitoes of No. 2 Group attacked targets along the French coast in order to otherwise occupy the German fighters. This tactic largely worked, as the 94 Lancasters had a mainly hassle-free flight along their extended route. They didn't encounter zero problems, however, with 4 aircraft suffering slight damage due to bird strikes, which also wounded 2 aircrew. 1 Lancaster of 207 Squadron, however, whilst over the Bay of Biscay developed engine trouble and so had to turn back on the 3 remaining engines. When 20 miles west of Brest, they came under attack by 3 Arado 196 seaplanes of the German Navy. During the aerial gunfire, 2 of the Arados were shot down, and the 3rd was sufficiently damaged that it broke off its attack. Sadly, Flight Engineer Sergeant Kenneth Chalmers was killed during the fight, and despite this incident, the Lancaster managed to complete the rest of its flight home and landed safely at RAF Langer in Nottinghamshire. For their actions in fighting off the attackers, the crew were awarded the Distinguished Flying Medal. 60 miles to the west of the target of Le Creusot, at the confluence of the Allier and the Loire rivers, sits the town of Nevers. This was the final waypoint en route and at the end of the low-level approach. At the head of the formation, as Slee's aircraft arrived at Nevers, he turned on green signal lights to alert the following aircraft that the waypoint had been reached. It was time to climb to bombing height. As they arrived at the target of Le Creusot, and with each of the squadrons staggered in height between 2,500 feet and 7,500 feet, dusk had fallen. The lead aircraft could not have hoped for better visibility also, as the target came into clear view. Slee signalled with a red light to the following formation that he had arrived at the target, and he opened his bomb bay doors. Up to this point, there had been no German defences encountered. The element of surprise had been achieved. The first of the formation began releasing their 500-pound bombs. Observers in the lead aircraft reported success with reports such as "bombs burst on factory" and "bang on target." Later aircraft were not quite as jubilant, as although they could see large explosions, there was now a good deal of smoke hindering their targeting. A tail gunner was shocked to observe that his aircraft's bombs had landed in nearby housing, something they were trying so hard to avoid. Just 7 minutes after the first Lancaster arrived on scene, it was over. The only resistance the Lancasters had encountered was from some limited anti-aircraft fire and small arms fire. The 6 Lancasters that had been tasked with attacking the electrical transformer station included Guy Gibson and Flight Lieutenant John Hopgood. Hopgood would also be joining the mission against the dams alongside Gibson the following year. They successfully hit their target also, each hit throwing up a shower of sparks and electric blue flashes. Unfortunately, Lancaster Whiskey 4774, belonging to 61 Squadron and flown by Squadron Leader William Coe, was lost. Following his low-level attack run, which he successfully executed, he struck a building and crashed. Of the 7-man crew, all were killed, except for Sergeant Richard Turtle, who survived but was taken prisoner of war. The only other incident was to the Lancaster of Flight Lieutenant Hopgood. Again, because of flying very low, just 150 feet, his aircraft took damage from the blast of its own bombs. However, remained airworthy and was able to continue flying. With the bombing over, the remaining 92 Lancasters now had to head for home. The darkness of night had now fallen and provided the cover that they were hoping for, and they all returned safely home, although about half of the formation were forced to land at bases in the south of England. The returning aircrews wasted no time in filling out their reports, most of which were celebratory. Indeed, Guy Gibson's report quoted, "one of the greatest low-level daylight raids of the war." However, further up the chain there was a more hesitant approach. Not wanting to disbelieve or discredit the aircrew reports, it was thought wise to wait for intelligence reports and reconnaissance flights to be made before declaring a mission success. As the raids were carried out in failing daylight, immediate photographic evidence was not possible, and so it would be the next day that a photo reconnaissance Spitfire Mark IV of No. 543 Squadron, flown by Acting Squadron Leader Tony Hill, would visit the scene. Hill was an expert in low-level photographic reconnaissance, and he was the pilot involved in capturing images of the Würzburg radar on a French cliff top on the English Channel coast, leading to its capture by British forces during Operation Biting, the Brunval raids. On this flight to Le Creusot, however, his camera failed to operate, and so he had to return empty-handed. But following a few days of unsuitable weather, he tried again, and this time his camera did work, and he returned with some telling images. The results were mixed. A good deal of the bombs had fallen onto the housing area adjacent to the mill, as had been spotted by observers on board some of the Lancasters. But a good deal of bombs had also found their targets. A large amount of destruction was observed at the rolling mills, the forgeries and the metalwork shops. General machine shops, locomotive shops and warehousing was also either severely damaged or completely destroyed. The Schneider Works did return to limited operations 3 weeks later, but it would be a full 8 months before normal operations would return. The electrical transformer station at Montchanin also suffered severe damage and was forced out of action for 2 years. The final conclusion of Operation Robinson was that it was a success. This critical installation and very important weapons manufacturer was forced out of normal use for a considerable time, and would have been felt as a huge blow to the German hierarchy. The crews were lauded by Sir Arthur Harris, who now had his successful mission. He also now had a realisation of the capability of the Avro Lancaster, and as importantly, the skills and airmanship of the crews that operated them. Following low-level daylight raids on Augsburg, Danzig and now Le Creusot, another was carried out against targets in Milan. This was all superb experience building that would allow for the best of these No. 5 Group aircrews to be specially selected the following year, along with Wing Commander Guy Gibson, to form 617 Squadron, the Dambusters. Operation Robinson mission leader Wing Commander Leonard Slee was promoted to group captain, and in June 1943 would again put these skills to use in leading another Lancaster raid on the former Zeppelin works at Friedrichshafen during Operation Bellicose, with considerable success.